Well, welcome to this Conveyancing Matters chat, and Stu and I are delighted to welcome media star, PR guru, and all-round good egg Russell Quirk back with us. Welcome to Conveyancing Matters with Lorraine and Stu. Join us for a chat about all things property. Hello, Russ. How are you doing?
Hello. Good to see you again. I'm very well. Very well, thank you.
Good. So, well, Russ, thanks for joining us. Well, talk us a little bit, tell us about your media stardom since we last saw you, Russ, before we get into the meat of the conversation.
Well, stardom might be a slight exaggeration, I think.
No.
I just happen to be kind of right place, right time, I'm sure. And I've gone from being lucky enough over the last few years to do some property punditry for, BBC, Sky, and increasingly for Talk TV and GB News. I guess because I'm a bit of a political animal, political stuff being my hobby. I used to be a local councillor where I live in Brentwood in Essex. I was for 8 years. A bit of politics creeps out every now and again when I'm talking about the property market. And so the kind of the brains, if you like, at GB News and Talk TV have said, oh, actually, maybe you might want to come on and commentate about some stuff that's purely politics, social commentary, political commentary. So I've done a lot more of that over the last year or so, which I really enjoy. And I've ended up doing some real fun stuff, to be honest. I mean, some real fun stuff. There's a show on Talk TV called Plank of the Week, which airs every Friday at 7 o'clock. And that is a panel of 4 of us, plus Mike Graham, who's the host, who's also one of the Talk TV presenters, where we mock and slate celebrities, politicians, businesses in the media that we believe, in our opinions, have done stupid things in the previous week and are, planks, hypocrites, idiots, or whatever. So that's really fun. And that show now, the last one I did actually, had 250,000 views on YouTube. I mean, it's
Wow.
becoming a really powerful medium, actually. So yeah, a bit of fun, allows me to vent my spleen politically. I still do a lot of property commentary, and of course at the moment I think that's particularly poignant because the property market is in a strange place where there's lots of pundits saying it's going to collapse, and there's people like me saying, look, hang on, it isn't as good as it was a year ago, but let's not be too hyperbolic about it. Let's be reasonable. Let's not grab every morsel of potential bad news just because some mad professor at some obscure university in Scotland says house prices might crash 35%.
I know, it's nonsense, isn't it? I mean, Stu and I talk,
it's true,
Yeah, Stu and I talk about this. I mean, anybody that's been in the game as long as the 3 of us know that, interest rates are always going to go up and property prices were always going to go down. I mean, there's always going to be a correction. It's just a question of how much.
It's cyclical, but look, property prices in the 2 worst property downturns we've ever had, which was the end of the 80s, beginning of the 90s, and also 2008-9, peak to trough, house prices dropped about 17%. I'm not even sure that would constitute a crash. So to talk about house prices dropping 35%, I mean, that would leave probably, I don't know, whatever, a third or a quarter of the country in negative equity. But it's unfeasible given the mismatch between huge demand, lack of supply. And of course, as the market's got tighter, there will be less new builds built. It's unfeasible given that we are a nation of home-owning aspirants, even with interest rates at 5 or 6%, which, by the way, everybody's been stress tested on for 10 years. So the stress test that mortgage lenders and brokers have subjected borrowers to has been about 5 or 6% for the last 10 years. So it really isn't the Armageddon, in my opinion, that people have said. What we should look out for is the Bank of England, the unelected, unaccountable Bank of England, who were given independence in 1997. The problem there is that if they continue to increase rates, what we'll end up with is not so much a taming of inflation. We will then end up with a recession and a loss of jobs and business closures. That's a far, far worse prospect, I think, than a bit of inflation, frankly, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think it's one of those, isn't it? There's a lot of people that have yet to be affected. A lot of people that sort of had 2-year fixed deals, 3-year fixed deals, 5-year fixed deals, and that affordability is yet to come out the woodwork, isn't it?
That's true. But a lot of those people, by the time, hopefully, they're out of their 3-year fixes or their 5-year fixes, rates will have started to drop. I mean, swap rates, and people don't seem to understand how the financial markets work. Look, I'm not professing to be an expert, but just because the Bank of England put rates up, it doesn't mean that automatically fixed rate mortgage costs go up, because fixed rate mortgage rates are linked to things like gilt yields and swap rates, which are more of a barometer of the economy than they are of Bank of England rates. So as soon as the economy starts to, fingers crossed, look better, those swap rates reduce and therefore fixed rate mortgage costs reduce. So, I think there's a lot of silver linings to the clouds that, of course, the negative pundits, those that want a bit of a PR headline, conveniently fail to point out. But anyway, I'm trying to be the voice.
Well, actually, Russ, thanks for that. But actually, of course, as you know, that's not the main reason we invited you on. Because I saw you on LinkedIn last week, and a couple of things that are sort of close to my heart. Because I noticed you were standing outside an office in Bury St Edmunds, which isn't a million miles from me, protesting on behalf of some poor leaseholders. And really, what Stu and I wanted to chat about really was that, because I really want to know how a TV media guy from Essex, ends up outside an office in Bury St Edmunds with a placard. So do tell us.
Yeah. Well, and I guess quite unusual, because people would expect that because of my PR firm, because of proper PR kind of working generally for businesses, whether it be agents or property funds or mortgage companies, whatever, that I would be the one kind of working for the freeholder or the landlord. So I've kind of turned poacher temporarily for the leaseholders, of which there are 237 at a development called the Mill, which is on the quayside at Ipswich. I was contacted by one of them because they saw my Wizz Air exploits, which
of course.
Yeah, so where I took on the might of Wizz Air, they didn't pay the county court judgment that I got against them, and so I sent the bailiffs in, and the bailiffs got the money through, I guess, fear of starting to nick things out of their office, planes and whatever. So a leaseholder contacted me and said, look, can you help us with this? Because we also have a David and Goliath type issue. So I went up, got involved, and as a no cost to the leaseholders thing, I've decided to kind of take this on as a campaign to try and bring attention to their plight. And basically, in a nutshell, what that plight is: 237 flats. They were built just as the financial crisis hit in 2008-9. Just at that point, as many did, the developer went bust. So the developer went out of business and an administrator was engaged, as obviously is normal. Now, normally administrators are put in place to kind of temporarily run the business and to try and get the best deal possible for the creditors. So it tends to be a temporary endeavor. 13 years on, that administrator is still in place and nothing has happened. And in the meantime, the cladding on the side of the building has been deemed as unsafe post-Grenfell. Some of it has even been ripped off in the winds because it wasn't fixed properly. So the administrator, RSM, who happens to have an office in Bury St Edmunds, but also elsewhere, they're an international business, they kind of very boldly and very correctly sued the original construction company. So successfully sued the builder effectively for £15 million. So that £15 million was paid by that company. And I could name them. I won't name them, but because it's a matter of public record. But anyway, that's not the point of the story. That £15 million ends up in the bank account of RSM. So the leaseholders think, and this is 5 years ago, the leaseholders think, well, that's great. So now they've got £15 million. They can fix the cladding and the construction issues.
Yeah, they must have been thinking light at the end of the tunnel at that point.
Yeah, and everyone's thinking, look, these guys at RSM are fantastic. They're heroes, kind of thank you very much. Well, RSM, in the last 5 years, since receiving that money from the courts, from that legal action, have done absolutely nothing. They haven't repaired the cladding. They haven't sought to do anything by way of remediation of some of the construction problems. They haven't put any fire safety measures in place apart from a very expensive waking watch, which of course is a couple of guys sitting at either end of a corridor watching to see if the place is going to go up in flames. So no sprinkler system, no fire alarm. They've sat on their hands, frankly. And the leaseholders, of course, now, as you well know as lawyers, are now sitting on properties that are worthless. They can't sell them because no conveyancer is going to convey the title of a property. And look, you might want to elaborate on this. Maybe I'm wrong, but from what I've seen, none of them have been able to sell. They can't remortgage. They're getting to the end of their fixed rates and having to go on to very high variable rates. You've got leaseholders in financial distress. You've got some of the leaseholders that have very genuine mental health issues now as a consequence of this debacle. So I've engaged with RSM over the last couple of months, and they've been very polite and very professional in replying, but it's all been obfuscation. So there's been no means of trying to resolve this. So what I then did, I managed to find a local business, a big business locally, who's done this sort of thing before, that I've negotiated with, and they said, look, at the right money, we will take this project on, we'll buy the whole development of the whole freehold, we'll fix the cladding, get everybody out of cladding jail, and they'll obviously, refurb the flats that are empty. They'll do their thing to get their money back. But the very important thing is, at first, it then means that these 237 leaseholders get out of cladding jail. So I put that deal to RSM, and within a couple of days, they just came back and said, no. That was it. No. So I've gone back to RSM several times and said, look, you don't want to fix it. You don't want to sell it. You've got 15 million quid in the bank. Let's have a little dig into what's going on here. So I looked at the official report that is done every year by RSM, the administrator, to the High Court. That's something they have to do on an annual basis. Lo and behold, the fees that have been levied by RSM now total £1.4 million. So I've contended to RSM that they are simply dragging this out because they want to keep accruing fees at the rate of £150,000 a year, because it's just nice work on that basis. Now, of course, I get the standard copy and paste stuff back saying, no, we've got the leaseholder's safety and best interest at heart, which in my opinion is definitely not true. So what we decided to do is to go with about 25 leaseholders with banners and a megaphone, having tipped off the BBC, ITV, The Guardian, the Ipswich Star, the East Anglian Daily Times, the Bury, this, that, and the other. So we had about 7 different journalist groups there. Yeah, Bury Free Press, yeah. And we protested there last Monday, and it was a very successful endeavour based on the press that we got. So I've now written to RSM. I said, look, we're going to keep doing this. You need to do the right thing and forget money and commerciality. You've got 237 households here hanging that are in purgatory financially and from a mental health perspective. Do the right thing. And we're hoping that as we increase pressure, I've just had a meeting, fun enough, with, not today, but in the last few days, with Tom Hunt, who's the local MP for Ipswich. He's been very, very accommodating. He's now written to Michael Gove as the Secretary of State for Levelling Up Housing and Communities. So we are ramping the pressure up now on RSM just to do the right thing. So that was what that was all about.
What are the statutory? This isn't my area at all. I'm not sure if you know more, Stu. But what are the statutory responsibilities on administrators? They can't just indefinitely tread water.
Well, they have an obligation as the freehold owner to make sure that they're running that business correctly, and therefore I would argue there's a duty of care when it comes to safety and so on to those leaseholders, which I think they're breaching. But that we need to delve deeper there. They will say, well, look, we put a waking watch in place, and that's kind of okay because it ticks a box. But of course, as administrators, their only obligation, unfortunately, is to the creditors, and the creditors are this amalgamation of bad banks in Ireland, so including. And when I say bad, that was the term that was used by the Irish government. So bad debt banks. So Allied Irish Bank is one of them, who lent the original developer the money. When the developer went bust, at the same time, those Irish banks either went bust or ended up being underwater on a load of these development loans. So you've got really an administrator here in the UK, RSM, and the bad bank conglomerate NAMA in Ireland, calling all the shots. And all NAMA think about and worry about is getting as much money back as they possibly can, because that's their obligation to the Irish taxpayer. And by the way, NAMA have already returned a surplus of €4 billion. So that's €4 billion more than the debts that they originally took on, right? So they've got enough money, enough cover to subsidise the sale of the mill, even if they sold the thing for a negative premium, but they just simply refuse to do so. And you think, well, I don't see the property market getting any better over the next year or two. So what are you going to do? Just keep it running. So the obligation, unfortunately, is to the creditors from RSM's point of view, which is NAMA. But the leaseholders are they've been set adrift. They've just been left literally high and dry.
It's a terrible, terrible situation. What's your view, Stu?
Yeah, it's incredible. I think sometimes we get caught up, don't we, from a conveyancing point of view, talking about the Building Safety Act. And, sometimes I think we lose sight, actually, and lose empathy of the people that have got these problems, and actually why the Act came in the first place. You know, sometimes we need to remind ourselves why it's actually in existence. And, you know, an example like this is terrible for people involved, because they are trapped, aren't they? You know, it's
well, they are. But what's an odd thing as well, I don't know if you saw in the news last week, Michael Gove apparently has returned £1.9 billion worth of funding because he doesn't know where to spend it. And it was exactly for this purpose. Now, with this situation, the problem is if RSM and NAMA decide that they're going to liquidate the freehold business, it's called Wolfside Regeneration Limited, if you want to have a look. If they liquidate it, it means that the Waking Watch will have to stop immediately because there's no money to fund it. There'll be no pot of money left. That will go back to the Irish taxpayer. So then immediately the 237 leaseholders will have to evacuate. So literally they will lose their homes physically, not just financially. Ipswich Council will have to house those 237 families immediately. I mean, literally that day. And the taxpayer, the British taxpayer, then has to pick up the bill. There's a legal term, and I can't remember what it is, but when an administrator liquidates an asset and there's a consequence in terms of kind of loose ends, the Crown picks up the pieces. So the British taxpayer effectively is subsidising the profit, a big profit, of the Irish taxpayer. It's absolutely and totally unacceptable. So one of the things that I'm seeking to do now, this is big and bold, is to continue to lobby the government so that the cracks that these people have fallen through are welded up effectively. Because what's happened in all this legislation is, Stu, you rightly say, these people have been kind of forgotten as kind of edge cases, but not just the leaseholders. If RSM and NAMA have their way and they liquidate the business, then we all, everyone watching this as a taxpayer, effectively is going to have to pay to fix all the problems. And by the way, that's 20 million quid. So the remediation of this building, the cladding or the construction issues, because it's so dilapidated now, it's a £20 million bill that we as the British taxpayer is going to have to pay, because that will be the only option if the whole thing is banged into liquidation. It's absolutely scandalous.
Well, I mean, the scandal continues, really, Russ, because as you know, I mean, and you know, Stu and I talked about this. You know, we've done some Building Safety Act webinars for our subscribers, and of course, you know, the principle of the Building Safety Act, and I know that your leaseholders issues sort of predate that, but it's all kind of in the same package really now. And of course, it's completely unarguable in terms of the sort of, you know, the fallout, the terrible fallout from Grenfell. But I mean, you know, the Building Safety Act itself, as you know, is just extraordinary. It's just, well, you know, I won't describe it as I described it off air, but it's a terrible, terrible piece of legislation. It's not all enforced yet. The government are already, you know, producing amendment to the regulations of the regulations. And conveyancers are, and as Stu said, you know, conveyancers are stepping back from the brink and saying, look, just from a sort of professional indemnity liability point of view, we just cannot pick this work up because
we won't do leaseholds. Yeah. And where does that leave the owners of those leasehold properties? You know,
and it does leave the poor leaseholders absolutely high and dry. But the bottom
and to be clear,
is,
Lorraine, there are hundreds of thousands of these now. Maybe not the same issue as I've described in terms of there being multiple administrators involved, but there are hundreds of thousands of flats across Britain where only a small percentage have been remedied. You know, the remediations happen by way of, you know, anyone doing the right thing or use of Homes England money. The really frustrating thing with my situation here at the Mill is that the buyer, the company that I've introduced, is already Homes England approved. Right? So they're sitting there waiting. They're saying, look, to be honest, they want a little bit of money back from that 15 million quid, not loads, but they said, look, we can't make this work without a little bit of that money. We will then put our funds in and Homes England money and rectify the whole thing. And it's completely reckless, and it's a big word, but completely reckless, I think, of RSM not to do that deal and to put everybody right. And you know, again, leaseholders, mental health and so on notwithstanding, the fact there's only the only commercial deal that they're ever going to be able to do because of the state of the market. So what they're waiting for otherwise, who knows? But look, the whole thing, the whole cladding thing, and especially the amount of properties across Britain that haven't been rectified yet post Grenfell. I mean, I think it's only 10% have. I mean, there's still hundreds of thousands that haven't. Yeah. It really is, and quite what elected councillors and elected MPs are doing, where these situations are exactly why you elect representatives to represent you on a political stage. They've all failed. Government, local councils,
completely.
councils,
I mean,
MPs,
you know,
they've all failed in their duty to their residents.
Yeah, unarguable.
Without any shadow of a doubt. But do you wonder, I mean, I wonder, Russ, you know, how, and this is an awful thing to say to, you know, a PR man, but on the sort of Grenfell Building Safety Act, you know, lobbying appears to have failed so far. And I'm not saying therefore you shouldn't do it, but you know, does that frustrate you? And how do you think, well, I'm going to do something different? Because I mean, at the end of the day, Michael Gove stood up, I think, at least twice and said, oh, we're going to abolish leasehold. And then, you know, probably less than 2 weeks later, it's gone, oh, actually, well, that'd be a little bit tricky. We can't.
It's like everything that politicians say, Lorraine, isn't it? Rental reform.
They'll sort of almost say anything.
Yeah, no, they do. They say anything that week that their advisors suggest might be a great headline in the Mail and the Express and the Sun, and then they either then forget about it, or of course they U-turn. And you know, whether it's Rishi Sunak, Boris Johnson, Keir Starmer, you know, they must be dizzy with the amount of U-turns that they continue to make. No, I unfortunately, I mean, you guys know me quite well. When I get my teeth stuck into something, I do tend to be a bit of a pit bull. So the next stage of this is if you know, diplomacy hasn't worked, and I've tried to do the right thing by communicating, bringing a buyer in and so on. If that doesn't work, the protests might. You know, when you've got 100 people outside your office with loud hailers and placards, and you know, when you now Google, by the way, RSM, on that first page, as well as RSM's own website coming up, so does all the bad press that I ensured they got last week, right? So that's not a good look from a PR perspective. But the next stage 3, is legal action. So what we will do is, because we've formed a leaseholder association as one body, one voice to galvanise everybody, we will take legal action either against RSM or NAMA in Ireland, or against the government itself. And I'm really not phased as to suing the government, because that is something you could do, and it sounds quite fun to me. So let's do that. You know, I haven't had a legal. Oh no, I've had the Wizz Air case this year. Last year I had another big one that I won. I tend to pick my fights very carefully on the basis that no matter how big they are, I'm confident that I'm going to win. So suing RSM, NAMA, or the British government over the mill is something that if we have to do, we'll do, and I quite relish it. And that in itself.
How would that be funded, though, Russ?
We'll have to crowdfund it probably, but yeah, look, that's something that's not beyond the realms of possibility. We'll try and do a lot of the work ourselves. Maybe we'll find some friendly pro bono lawyers. I mean, do they exist anymore that might help some beleaguered residents that are fairly, you know, have had enough of this particular situation, and yeah, maybe there might be some humanity at play that we can call on from the point of view of not having to spend as much money as otherwise we might. So I think that's the next step. And of course, look, legal action is something not to be taken lightly. It takes ages, and yes, it is costly, but it tends to focus the defendant's, the respondent's mind, I find, particularly when they receive the letter before claim. And I can't mention why, because I'm under, as you can imagine, a strict settlement agreement. But the legal action that I took last year, the letter before claim was 14 pages long.
Yeah, they always are, aren't they? And they normally were in. They normally were in at like 4 o'clock on a Friday afternoon, if you really want.
Yeah, and it alleged with some significant substance, you know, all sorts of massive legal faux pas, and that got the attention of the people involved. Actually, not the person himself, but his backers, his shareholders, effectively, and they caved. So the government might not do that, perhaps, but I'll have a good go. I'll make it as noisy and as uncomfortable as I possibly can until they just do the right thing. Because look, this is the archetypal David and Goliath fight, I think. And often in these things, I mean, you certainly end up with the public on your side. And as a consequence, you know, David often wins.
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely unarguable, really. So, Stu, what's your view? And Stu, what's your view on the sort of maybe the kind of leasehold market more generally? I mean, before we let Russ go, you know, where are we?
I think that's the big worry at the moment. I think there's now so much negative press about leaseholds, just as a complete generalisation. And maybe, you know, whether it's from an estate agency point of view, even the general public's point of view, I don't think there's an understanding there. You know, as to why these problems exist. And yeah, I don't think it's good for the market. You know, you wouldn't want to be buying leaseholds as a generalization almost of any type now, perhaps.
Well, it's true. I guess not just the cladding issues, but you've got lease renewals. I mean, that Wild West situation where you get to 75 years unexpired, and you have to then fight the freeholder for a renewal fee, and they say, "Oh, you just stick a finger in the air and say 25 grand. There you go." I mean, that was muted as being legislated for about 2 years ago, where it was going to become formulaic, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So they would take the kind of value of the property and and so on. Well, that's disappeared. So you've now got people that buy a leasehold at 99 years in good faith, own the thing for 20 years, try to sell it, and of course they can't, because the buyer's lawyer says, as you would, hang on a sec, this doesn't put you in a great position. You need that lease extended, and the freeholder can just name their own price.
Yeah.
Well, the government in its genius, Russ, because I cannot believe that any knowledgeable property lawyers looked at the Building Safety Act before it was issued, because came onto the statute books, because it massively changed right at the 11th hour. So, as I'm sure you've heard, there are lots of people now in the very invidious position who are in relevant buildings that might, that fall within the ambit of the Act, who've got the least worst option of either not extending their lease to make sure they stay within the ambit of the Act, or extending the lease and falling outside the ambit of the Act, because in its genius the government picked Valentine's Day 2022 as the absolute sort of written in stone date for the status of the qualifying leaseholder, but forgot, nobody said, but a lease that's extended is a surrender and regrant, and so if it's dated after the 14th of Feb 2022, it can't possibly fall and get the protections under the Act. So you've got, and the government sort of has put out in April, Russ, they put out some commentary and sort of said, oh yeah, we forgot that. We'll legislate as soon as parliamentary time allows, but in the meantime, landlords, you just let them, the leaseholders, have these these protections, and if there's a problem, drop us an email. And you think, really?
More government ineptitude, but unfortunately it's the same with any knee-jerk legislation. And look, dare I venture, look, here's the controversial thing that you've been waiting for me to say on this podcast. I guess if you're a really good lawyer, the last thing you're going to do is work for the government. You're going to work for yourself or Shoesmiths or Linklaters or something, aren't you? So maybe that's why legislation that's drafted for the statute books is so crap.
Well, I think there is an issue around, not to sort of, criticise the parliamentary drafts people, many of whom I'm sure are very, very good, but I think this is the problem with rushing stuff out in haste that hasn't been properly consulted on, and clearly the specialists in the area, because nobody has contacted the likes of Stu or anybody else. No conveyancers at the coalface can run the risk, really, many can't, of advising on affected properties. It's just extraordinary. Look, and lots of indemnity insurers are saying, well, you can't. Where are yours with that, Stu?
We can, but you have to declare what you're doing. So again, you're talking additional premiums for. I think the way it's going, you are virtually talking additional premiums for acting on leaseholds. That's the way it's simply going. I think as a generalisation, leaseholds are getting such a dirty name now, and there's no differential between. You could have a small masonette that is completely unrelated to what we're talking about today, but it's getting a dirty name now, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It's funny. I was thinking about using the current downturn in the market as an opportunity to buy a buy-to-let. And I had to say to myself, as you're looking through Rightmove and you're going, up to 250 grand, 10 miles radius or whatever. I thought, so I excluded all flats. Yeah. So I'm only going to buy, if I do buy one, a freehold, because, the problematic situation with leaseholds is multiple, isn't it? And you're right. So I think lots of people will start saying, and that would affect value, right? So what you'll end up with in the future is pounds per square foot in Basildon, for instance. Well, a house is 400 quid a square foot, a flat's 300 quid a square foot. Because of the peril that is related to purchasing and owning and the risk attached to it of owning a leasehold. That's going to happen, I think.
Well, and of course, layered on top of that then is the ridiculous, attitude and significant responsibilities that the lenders plonk on conveyancers. I know, bless you, Russ, you've always got your,
conveyancers. Let me just get my tiny.
I know, you've always got your, I thought we'd just give you the opportunity to have a little pop at conveyancers. But, the serious point is that a lot of the process under the Building Safety Act was meant to be sort of a self-certification exercise, which is okay as far as it goes. That was fine. But then the lenders have come along and weighed in and said, oh, but, you know, many of them have said lawyers to verify this, that and the other. And on the leasehold point, they've put a section in the lender's handbook where on all leaseholds, all leaseholds, you're supposed, you know, conveyancers are supposed to ask about, you know, Building Safety Act stuff, landlord certificates, you know, the whole 9 yards on all leaseholds. So as Stu was saying, you know, your 2-story maisonette that was never going to fall within the ambit of the Act, and the lenders have just weighed in and said, no, we want you to ask this on everything.
Yeah,
so
just
the
in
lenders
case.
have got to take their share of the blame, really.
Yeah, but they won't, will they? Either they'll expect you to, or your PI company.
Well, or, you know, firms won't do it. Firms won't do the work. There's a whole bunch of firms that are just saying, no, we're not going to act for, well, certainly Nationwide, Barclays and now HSBC have added themselves to the list, and the mortgage works. But so, Ross, what would you say then? And I know this is going to stick in your craw, but I do want you to say something positive. So for, you know, law firms that are kind of out there in the market, I think we can accept that probably the agents don't know much about the Building Safety Act. Do correct me if I'm wrong. But from a communications point of view, Russ, from your sort of PR point of view, you know, what would you be saying to law firms about how they, you know, present what work they're prepared to do and not to do? And that is a serious question rather than just, you know, slag off conveyancers for a laugh.
All right, so the positive, and look, I am critical of conveyancers. I am, because I do think you've got to come out of the dark ages. I think, dare I venture, that when it comes to leasehold, you've got 2 choices as a firm. You know, you either decide, look, it's just not our thing. We don't specialise in leasehold. You just park it to one side, and then maybe you'll end up with leasehold specialists, I suppose. But I think, shock horror, it might be an opportunity for you guys to actually raise fees. Wow, because you need to do that. And look, Stu will be smiling. Look, he is smiling. Look, my honest view. And I don't know which comes first in the chicken and egg scenario here, but you guys need to raise fees. Maybe this is the dawn of a new era for conveyancers, where actually you can start earning what you're worth. And as a consequence of that, you know, you do better, but the outcome, the consequence is better. Because I think, look, undoubtedly, I mean, how can you do a leasehold right now if your standard fee is 400 quid plus 100 quid premium for a leasehold? You've got all this rubbish, all this crap to deal with. It's totally and utterly unsustainable, isn't it? I mean, that sounds like, you know, decent 4 figures worth of work rather than 400 or 500 quid, isn't it?
You have got that total imbalance at the minute, insofar as you have this beast that is leasehold and you have the current market conditions. And I think the problem with it is people or firms are not sure where they are with it. And the worry about putting the fee up in this market, that is the generalization I'm getting. Only insofar as we go on all these courses, we all talk about fees. The general consensus is always they should be going up. But the practical reality is that is not the case.
Well, yeah, who's going to do that first? You know, particularly when you've got the kind of the factory conveyancers doing what they're doing, you know, pile them high, sell them cheap. But then at the same time, this is the chicken and egg thing. You know, conveyancers got themselves to blame, because there's still conveyancers. If I Google right now, cheap conveyancer, guarantee someone will pop up at 299. And that kind of sets the market. I had a conversation with a seller the other day that had been quoted by a solicitor in Brentwood, over £1,000 to do the conveyancing on my property. Russell, what do you think? And I went, yeah, sounds about right. She went, but I've seen it much cheaper online. I said, yeah, just be careful, right? You're selling a £1.3 million house and you're worried about £1,000 worth of conveyancing fees. Just said, if you know them and you've got a relationship with them, that's just great. Do it, you know. But they were concerned because they'd seen online, I can get it for £300. I'm going, oh my God, what do you think you're going to get for 300 quid?
I know.
So look, here's your soundbite, guys. So yeah, look, there's me sticking up for conveyancers and suggesting that fees should be higher. There's your headline.
I think it is, and probably on that bombshell, Russ, that would be an appropriate time to bring this chat to a close. So, okay. You know, it's been lovely to see you again. And as I say, we're both really delighted. And also, you know, the plight of the people at the mill and as you say, hundreds of thousands of leaseholders up and down the country is very much, you know, I think should be on people's minds. And frankly, Russ, you know, all power to your elbow for for doing what you're doing. Really, I've got to say, it slightly sticks in the craw to say it, mate. But you know,
well, you know me, I'm the people's champion. I'm the Wat Tyler of the property industry. You see?
Well, it's really kind of you to join us, Russ. So
Pleasure.
take care, and we'll see you soon.
Good to see you guys.
Take care. Bye.